I'd love to be able to tell you the story of an amped up bear ripping through German and Italian soldiers in World War II. I'd love to have pictures of a bear wearing a uniform with all kinds of medals, saluting Allied leaders at the end of the war. I'd love to, but that would be pure fiction. However, the Polish did actually have an honest to goodness bear in their ranks in World War II. It just wasn't a frontline fighter. Its story is still extremely interesting. Allow me to introduce you to Corporal Wojtek, the World War II Polish beer drinking, cigarette eating, spy catching, wrestling, crate carrying, actual, factual war bear. The story of Wojtek actually begins in September of 1939, before his birth. Fascist Germany and the Communist Soviet Union collectively decided that Poland had existed for far too long, and the two world powers agreed to go halvesies on conquering it, kicking off World War II in the process. Poland, being on the indefensible northern European plain and nowhere near as militarily capable as either Germany or the Soviet Union, succumbed quickly to the invasion. This meant that portions of the Polish army that weren't executed by the Soviets and the Germans got taken as POWs. Polish soldiers were sent to the Soviet Union as prisoners of war. Of course, in June of 1941, the Germans decided to play the Uno reverse card on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and invade the Soviet Union. In the process of invading the Soviet Union, the Germans took full control of Poland. The Soviets remembered they had a sizable chunk of the Polish military as POWs, and decided that maybe those soldiers would put their disdain for the USSR aside long enough to aid the Allies in kicking the Germans out of Poland. Here's the problem for the Soviets, though. They can't really incorporate the Polish soldiers into the Soviet army. It was, after all, the Soviets who teamed up with the Germans to screw over Poland in the first place. And as brutal as Nazi Germany treated everyone who wasn't German, it's not like the Soviets were any better about the treatment of their enemies. The Soviets, after all, had committed the Katyn massacre, killing over 20,000 Polish people, including 8,000 military personnel. Obviously, there was no love lost for the Soviets amongst the Poles. The Soviets, out of necessity, had allied with the British and the Americans after Operation Barbarossa started, however, whom the Poles either didn't hate or at least hated significantly less than Germany or the USSR. So the Soviets had an idea. Why don't we reach out to the British? They've got control of Iran at the moment, whom we share a border with, so we can march the Polish POWs down into Iran and hand them off to the British. The British, still reeling from the initial success of the Blitzkrieg and probably willing to accept any help they could get at this point, agreed to take the Polish POWs on and incorporate them into their army. So the Polish prisoners, both military and civilian, were sent to Tehran, Iran by the Soviets to be released into the custody of the British. Somewhere along the way, the Polish former POWs encountered a young Iranian boy with, of all things, a bear cub in his backpack. When asked, the boy stated the bear cub's mother had been shot by hunters, leaving the cub orphaned. One of the Polish civilians, a young woman named, and I apologize in advance if I butcher the pronunciation on this, Irina Bokowicz, became enamored with the cub and apparently persuaded one of the soldiers, Lieutenant Anatol Tarnowicki, to purchase the bear. The fact that Bokowicz was a great niece of a Polish general probably had no impact whatsoever on her ability to persuade the soldiers. The cost of the cub was reported to be a Swiss Army knife, a tin of canned beef, and chocolate. Bokowicz originally took care of the bear, now named Wojtek, which roughly translates to happy warrior in English. The bear cub had difficulty swallowing at first, so he was fed condensed milk out of an emptied vodka bottle. Once he began to be able to swallow without issue, he got fed marmalade, fruit, honey, and syrup. He was also given beer, which wound up being his favorite beverage. The soldiers would use oranges for grenade practice, which Wojtek would then chase down and presumably eat. Fortunately, there's no record of him doing this with actual grenades, although he would apparently eat things that were on fire. Wojtek would eat lit cigarettes. Not smoke them, he would apparently eat them. He might take one puff, but then he would swallow them. But only if they were lit first. Apparently he wasn't fond of unlit cigarettes. I have no idea why a bear would want to eat tobacco, especially tobacco that was on fire, but that's how Wojtek rolled according to the soldiers he spent his time with. In August of 1942, Wojtek was donated to the 2nd Transport Company, which later went on to become the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. The unit made the trek from Tehran, Iran to Alexandria, Egypt, so they could board a transport across the Mediterranean. And like with any war mascot, it's often tough to separate facts from stories with Wojtek. Some things do have footage, but some are stories whose only evidence is the story. The stories are consistent enough amongst the retellings that they seem reliable, so I have no problem reporting on them. And even if they're just war stories, they're still pretty damn entertaining. Wojtek would often wrestle the soldiers he lived with, often a few at a time. He was clearly playing, as he easily could have mauled the soldiers if he cared to. He was, after all, a bear. He would often copy the soldiers' behavior, such as marching on his hind legs when the troops were in formation. They even taught him to salute the officers. I'm not sure if he did these things all the time or just whenever he felt like it, but he was reported to have done them. There's actual video evidence of the wrestling, even. The soldiers became quite fond and protective of the bear. According to Sue Butler, daughter to one of the soldiers who served with Wojtek, he was a displaced bear and they were a displaced people, both without their families. He was, quote, funny and quite mischievous, but the bear, quote, thought that he was one of them. I'll put a link to the article I pulled the quote from in the description. Wojtek enjoyed taking showers when permitted. He eventually figured out how to get into the showers and turn the water on by himself. The issue, though, is that water was rationed. The troops were on the move, and on top of that, they were moving through desert, so water was a precious resource. Eventually, the unit forbade Wojtek to shower alone. I don't know who drew the short straw and had to monitor the bear while it showered, but I can virtually guarantee you that there are probably less people on Earth than you can count on your fingers with that particular skill listed on their resume. Although one of Wojtek's trips into the shower in particular wound up being much more exciting than the others. He wandered in to find an Arab spy in the shower facility. Apparently, the spy had been looking for a weapons cache or something similar for local dissidents to raid later. Upon finding the bear, the spy panicked. To be fair to the spy, if I'm doing anything and the phrase, and suddenly there was a bear behind me that I wasn't expecting comes up, my heart rate is going to jump up by a few dozen beats per minute. The spy, not unrealistically believing he was about to get mauled by a bear, created enough of a commotion to draw the attention of the Polish soldiers. The spy then surrendered to the troops. As a reward for rooting out the spy, Wojtek was given unlimited shower time and 2 bottles of beer. Eventually, the troops made it to Alexandria, where they were to board a British transport in order to cross the Mediterranean and join the Allies' Italian offensive. There was a small issue, though. British naval rules prohibited animal mascots on transport ships. The troops were absolutely not going to leave Wojtek behind, however. So they came up with a plan that I can't decide if it's brilliant or stupid, so I'm going to refer to it as stupidly brilliant. British regulations did not permit animal mascots on transports, but nothing in Polish regulations apparently prevented bears from being privates in the military. So the Polish drafted Wojtek into the actual army. He became Private Wojtek and got his own paybook and serial number. Whatever British soldier was responsible for double-checking who got on board the transport probably saw the bear, decided that he definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with this shit, and let Wojtek on board. Wojtek and the 22nd Artillery Supply Company eventually made their way to the Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy. Of course, being an artillery supply company, the 22nd was responsible for hauling crates of ammo to the artillery. These crates required multiple soldiers to move. Remember earlier how I said Wojtek would copy the soldiers from time to time? Apparently, without prompting, he got up on his hind legs, picked up a crate of artillery shells with his forelegs, and hauled it while walking on his back legs to where the humans were taking the boxes. While this is probably the most heavily disputed portion of Wojtek's story, there is at least one documented account of British soldiers claiming to have witnessed the bear hauling the ammo. Either because the tale was true, or because it was an amazing PR opportunity for the Allies, Wojtek was promoted to the rank of corporal for his actions during the battle. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company even began using the symbol of a bear carrying an artillery shell as their emblem. After the end of World War II, the Soviets occupied Poland, which they had captured on their way to eventually taking Berlin. The Soviets did not want the Polish soldiers allowed back into Poland, seeing them as a potential threat because of their military training, as well as likely being disgruntled with the USSR due to their treatment as POWs. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company, including Wojtek, wound up being stationed at Winfield Airfield in Scotland until being demobilized in November of 1947. Wojtek wound up being moved to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he lived the rest of his life until passing away in 1963 at the age of 21. Polish soldiers would often visit Wojtek in the zoo, even jumping the walls of his enclosure to wrestle with their old war buddy. There are, at present, 11 different monuments to Wojtek in 2 or 3 different countries, depending on how you count England and Scotland. This makes Wojtek possibly the most memorialized real bear in the world, although I wasn't able to verify that. There are 7 monuments to him in Poland, and 4 in the United Kingdom, 2 in England, and 2 in Scotland. I think I might have a new bucket list item: visit all 11 memorials to Wojtek. The Polish Institute of National Remembrance, or IPN, even designed a board game around Wojtek's story for 2 to 5 players ages 6 and up. The site Board Game Geek has a listing for the game from an Italian vendor for only €10, or about $10.50 USD. I'll put a link in the description just because I think it's funny. And there it is, the story of Wojtek, the World War II war bear. If you like this video, or also want to visit all the Wojtek monuments, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment on, or share the video. And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more weekly content. Thanks for watching, and just remember, if a bear suddenly appears behind you when you least expect it, surrender realistically is probably the best option. You really don't want to fight a bear.